Hello Internet, my name is Lave and welcome to my first video essay on my channel. Today we're going to talk about humour in action movies, not the action comedy subgenre, rather films that are primarily action movies that may or may not have funny moments in them. Because I believe there is a time and a place for a joke in an action movie depending on the tone and nature of the story and the situation the characters find themselves in, which we will discuss. But first, to help us on this journey, we're going to narrow down our field of view to just one action franchise, namely the Terminator movies, which we can all agree has had its ups and downs over the course of its 6 feature films, so today we'll be looking at all of them and asking, did humour kill the Terminator? Needless to say, there are spoilers ahead. Let's go back to where it all started, all the way back to the future, 2029. The opening to James Cameron's 1984 film, The Terminator, is an apocalyptic vision of the future, setting the tone for the rest of the movie. It's dark, bleak and foreboding, which continues into the T-800's introduction, demonstrating how effective Arnold Schwarzenegger's cold-blooded killer cyborg is. But that's not to say there isn't humorous moments in the first film. For example, when we first meet Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor, we see that she's just an ordinary girl doing an ordinary job, which she isn't particularly good at.
Nice going, kid. How to give you the tip?
She also has an ordinary circle of friends like her roommate Ginger and Ginger's boyfriend Matt, who provides us with the film's first real attempt at humour.
First, I'm gonna rip the buttons off your blouse one by one.
When Sarah and Ginger are preparing for their Friday date nights, Matt calls and mistakes Sarah for Ginger. He proceeds to reel off a rehearsed script explaining how he's going to seduce her, and Sarah giggles along before pretending she doesn't know who is calling. Realising his mistake, Matt uncomfortably apologises and asks to speak to Ginger, where he starts his seductive script all over again like he's the Casanova of phone sex.
First, I'm gonna rip the buttons off your blouse one by one.
This is a great example of using humour to build character in a short amount of time. Although Matt's character is short-lived, this gag does provide a welcome break to the building tension. It reaffirms that Sarah and her friends are just regular people in a funny and relatable way without being at odds with the tone of the rest of the film. The smash cut into the next scene adds weight to the joke, but it's also where we meet the next characters, the cops investigating the murders of the other Sarah Connors whilst trying to locate our Sarah, Lieutenant Ed Traxler and Detective Hal Vukovich. Now admittedly they are your stereotypical cantankerous cop duo who bicker with each other while smoking too many cigarettes and overdosing on coffee, but it's their locker room banter with each other that allows the audience to warm towards them in a short amount of time. Sure, Traxler is dismissive of his partner.
Did you see this scar?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Calls him names.
Yo, mama.
Tells him to shut up.
Shut up.
But when the T-800 storms the police station and Ed is gunned down, Hal is right there fighting and dying with him. Their deaths have more weight because Cameron quickly established their relationship with humour. They squabbled with each other for sure, but there was mutual respect there. From this point in the movie, there isn't any more humour as such. The main characters are already established and it builds to its climactic ending. However, on a side note, it's worth mentioning the only time we see Michael Biehn's character, Carl Reese, smile and laugh is the morning after he's declared his love for Sarah and she pulls the old think fast, throwing something at your face, could be a bag of explosives joke on him. I don't believe this is a moment to make the audience laugh, but it's there to show that Carl is rediscovering his humanity after a lifetime of fighting. He's actually enjoying life. Before that, he's practically a cyborg himself. He's learnt to numb his pain and is focused entirely on his mission. Incidentally, this is also, aside from a flashback in T2, the last time we see Sarah Connor laugh and smile as she begins her transition into a warrior. This arc is reflected in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, only this time with Arnold's reprogrammed T-800 sent back in time to protect John Connor. He tells us that the more time he spends with people, the more he learns, which is emphasised in the final line of the film, telling us that he's learned the value of human life. The warrior discovers his humanity. This was a risky move to make the villain from the first film the hero in the second, but James Cameron made it work with some well-judged, not hilarious but amusing moments between John and the T-800 as their relationship develops, and John gives him morality lessons like why you shouldn't kill people.
He'll live.
Or how to speak a bunch of Americanisms.
No problemo.
This approach could have easily turned the T-800 into a buffoon and conflicted with the overall darker tone of the film, but Cameron knows when to use it and when not to. For example, in the special edition cut, there is an extended scene where John teaches the T-800 how to smile, which was taken out of the theatrical version. As Cameron and William Wisher, the writer of T2, explain,
I certainly never missed it when we took it out. It was fun to shoot. Arnold and I had a good laugh over figuring this out. But what I felt was when I saw the film cut together that it was too rapid a gear shift between a funny moment to this, which is
I think
actually...
this is where you pick it up here.
Yeah, this is where we pick it up. They just pull in and then you cut to this.
Arguably, this is where Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines falters. Directed by Jonathan Mostow, it once again sees Arnold back as a reprogrammed Terminator, arriving in a familiar fashion through a time portal. However, this time it's played up as a joke right from the start, as he stumbles into a bar hosting a ladies' night and the T-850 sizes up the male stripper to take his clothes, who says, "Talk to the hand!" An out-of-date slang phrase in the 90s, let alone 2003, the year of T3's release. This is immediately followed up with another joke which sees the Terminator putting on some Elton John style sunglasses, breaking the fourth wall, looking straight down the lens. Both of these jokes seem to be there for the sake of having a joke. This unfortunately continues throughout the film and is even present in the new antagonist, the TX, played by Kristanna Loken. Shortly after her arrival, she's pulled over by a police officer and she seductively enlarges her breasts upon viewing a Victoria's Secret poster. This tongue-in-cheek approach immediately undermines her position as the villain, especially when compared to the villains in the first two films who do not use sex appeal to complete their mission. But T3 does arguably have one scene where the T-850's deadpan humour sort of works. Later on, when John Connor and Catherine Brewster finally start to bond over a faint glimmer of hope, the Terminator breaks the mood by saying,
Your levity is good. It relieves tension and the fear of death.
I personally did sort of laugh too when Dr. Silberman returns halfway through the film and then legs it when he sees Arnold carrying that coffin, but I'd kind of given up on the film at that point, and with all things considered, the jokes in Terminator 3 work against the overall tone of the franchise and the film, which actually ends in a good way with the start of the apocalypse, the start of Judgment Day, a bit of a downbeat, which brings us on nicely to Terminator Salvation, which continues the story in the future in 2018. McGee's take on the franchise perhaps understandably strived for a more serious tone following on from T3. After all, I can't imagine a lot of people would be cracking jokes after surviving nuclear war and being hunted by giant robots while starving to death. So there are justifiably fewer jokes in Salvation, aside from a couple. For example, when the young Carl Reese, now played by the late Anton Yelchin, repeats the line used by Sam Worthington's character Marcus, a human Terminator hybrid.
You point a gun at someone, you better be ready to pull the trigger.
You point that gun at somebody, you better be ready to pull the trigger.
This joke arguably works in the moment, demonstrating that the young Carl, who isn't the soldier that we know from the first film, admires and respects Marcus. And of course, you have to have, apparently, someone who says, "I'll be back" in a Terminator movie. This time, the honour fell to Christian Bale and his interpretation of John Connor.
I'll be back.
You could also say that the attempt to render a CGI Arnold was pretty funny too, but I'm not going to lower myself to that level. But the film was released 8 years after The Two Towers with Gollum and the same year as Avatar in 2009. I'm just saying. Perhaps the lack of Arnold and sense of humour was the reason Terminator Salvation wasn't as well received as its predecessors, which led to another sequel/soft reboot, Terminator Genisys, released in 2015. My least favourite of the entire franchise. Once again, Arnold is back and plays a reprogrammed Terminator, only this time he's sent to protect a young Sarah Connor in the 70s. This unfortunately happens in flashbacks, so we don't really get to see it, but essentially he becomes a strange protective fatherly figure to her, teaching her about the future, and together they revisit events from the first movie, changing the timeline. I think. I'm not sure, the time travel aspect gets really messed up in this one. On paper, the idea that the living tissue around the endoskeleton of the Terminator still ages normally isn't a terrible one, and the visual effects they used to recreate Arnold was an improvement on Salvation. But the approach to the T-800 character in general reduces him to a parody of himself, with a lot of jokes that include innuendos,
I've seen little to indicate that you're fit guardian for Sarah Connor.
callbacks,
I'll be back.
What?
and a running gag based entirely on the scene that Cameron cut from the theatrical version of T2, the one I mentioned earlier. To be honest, Terminator Genisys had a lot of problems on top of all that, so let's move on to the final film in the franchise, Terminator Dark Fate, directed by Tim Miller, which didn't kick things off in a controversial way at all. Moving that scene to the side for a second, the first act of Dark Fate, as the title would suggest, went back to its darker roots with a fast-paced cat-and-mouse game between a new Terminator called a Rev 9, played by Gabrielle Luna, and an augmented human protector Grace, played by Mackenzie Davis. The first act adopts the serious tone of the first Terminator films. The Rev 9 is a legitimate threat, it's high octane, and, aside from the obligatory callback line delivered this time by the returning Linda Hamilton, there isn't any real attempt at humour.
I'll be back.
That is until the reintroduction of Arnie's Terminator. Once again, the movie springboards off the ideas laid down in T2, that the T-800 has the capacity to learn compassion and humanity, and also the concept from Terminator Genisys that his outer living tissue ages normally.
This will be very hard to explain to Alicia.
Carl, as he's now called, explains that after completing his mission, killing John, he had no purpose and in time grew a conscience. He saved a woman in an abusive relationship, helped raise a son, and now he runs a draping business. Yeah, it's asking a lot of the audience, but to help buy into Carl's story, humour has once again been deployed.
I'm reliable, I'm a very good listener, and I'm extremely funny.
Okay.
This deadpan approach is arguably slightly better than the comical humour used in Rise of the Machines and certainly Genisys, but to me, it still comes across that the title character, the Terminator, is the jester of the movie. So was it Dark Fate that turned the Terminator into a joke? Well, it's obvious that every film since T2 has struggled with the notion of continuing the franchise with its main, aging star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. 3 of the 4 sequels since Terminator 2 have opted to take his character in a softer, more humorous direction. Yes, Terminator 2 Judgment Day incorporated humour into his character first, but in a way that was a part of the character's arc. He still had an edge to him. He was still a menacing presence.
Of course, I'm a Terminator.
The humour in the subsequent films made him lose that edge for me, but it's only part of the reason why I personally don't look on them as fondly as the originals. The main reason is because I was a fan of the predestined time loop presented by the first Terminator movie. I like the idea that Judgment Day, Skynet, the Resistance, John Connor and the future war is a result of retro-causality. It happens because Reese and the T-800 are sent back in time. In T2, that self-originating causal loop is broken by John, Sarah and the T-800, and every film since then has struggled to justify its own existence, with lackluster explanations such as
Judgment Day is inevitable.
or convoluted multiple timelines. So in effect, it was actually Terminator 2 Judgment Day that really killed the Terminator. He shouldn't have come back. Hello everyone, thank you so much for making it all the way through to the end of the video, which is in a different format to my other content, so I do hope you enjoyed it. I also hope that I showed that there actually is humour present in all of the Terminator films. I just think some handled it better than others, but I'm curious to know, where did the Terminator franchise lose its appeal to you? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked this video, let me know by liking it, sharing it, all of that stuff. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. See you in the next one, or I'll be back.